The spectres of Cold War and an arms race are haunting Europe and the world in general. They are there for all to see, but their existence is denied. It's fair to say that Cassandra may not be the most appealing representative of femininity. People never like bringers of bad news. When Moshe Kantor, a well-known public European activist and philanthropist, pressed for an assessment of the real dangers in nuclear arms proliferation, many were surprised. There was nothing to worry about. The nuclear peril was consigned to the past, along with the Cold War. However, Moshe Kantor is one of those rare breeds of people who don't only have important ideas, they also put them into effect. Moshe Kantor can be convincing, so he was able to pool the efforts of some of the world's most reputable experts on the non-proliferation of nuclear weapons and armament reduction and limitation, former ministers of defense and foreign affairs, heads of international organizations, generals and academics. Mr. Kantor made them an offer that they, recognizing their responsibility to the world, could not refuse. That's why the Luxembourg Forum brings together the most authoritative and unbiased leading experts, such as Des Brown, former British Secretary of State for Defense, William Perry, former US Secretary of Defense, Hans Blix, former IAEA Director General, and many others. Moshe Kantor founded the Luxembourg Forum on Preventing Nuclear Catastrophe, a unique world-class organization where candid discussions about the dangers facing the world can be held at such a high level. A graduate of the Sergei Ordzhonikidze Moscow Aviation Institute, Moshe Kantor researched and completed his PhD in automated control systems for spacecraft. That helped him to come to grips with the most complicated aspects of disarmament, which humanitarian scholars usually find difficult to grasp. Thanks to his efforts, the first international conference on preventing nuclear catastrophe was held in Luxembourg on May the 24th and 25th, 2007. It is not only the nuclear threat proper that could be fatal for civilization that constitutes the danger, said Moshe Kantor. It is frightful that mankind does not realize the scale and reality of a potential catastrophe. In Luxembourg, we demonstrated the threats that tomorrow might easily become a new Holocaust if wise people fail to join forces to stop them. Mohammed El-Baradei, Director General of the International Atomic Energy Agency, IAEA, and winner of the Nobel Peace Prize, warned, "We are at a crossroads. The existing system is in danger of collapse. We need a heavy commitment to nuclear disarmament, with clearly defined stages of implementation." The Luxembourg conference was addressed by Sergei Kirienko, then the director of the Federal Atomic Energy Agency, former head of the government of Russia, and now the first deputy chief of staff with Russia's presidential administration. Ever more countries now understand the need for peaceful uses of atomic energy. Hence, access to the benefits of nuclear energy is an objective process. This creates a principally new legal, or if you will, moral and ethical situation because to only take up a prohibitive position is legally, economically, and morally impossible. The most important thing now is to reconcile two vested rights. On the one hand, the right of any country to access the benefits of peaceful uses of atomic energy, and on the other hand, the right of the world community to demand an assurance of security and compliance with the non-proliferation regime. The problem Sergei Kirienko spoke of has become extremely acute due to the Iran nuclear problem, one of the principal topics of the Luxembourg Forum. Tehran alleged that Iran's attempt to split the atom was exclusively to generate atomic power. But the experts did not believe the country's leaders, who had huge reserves of oil and gas at their disposal. In May 2013, a representative forum of experts met in Montreux, Switzerland. Moshe Kantor, president of the Luxembourg Forum. Fred Tanner, director at the Geneva Center for Security Policy. Academic Roald Sagdeev. Rolf Ekius, chairman of the board of the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute. Academic Alexei Arbatov. General Vladimir Dvorkin. General Vladimir Yakovlev, former chief of Russia's strategic missile forces. Ariel Leviti, senior fellow in the nuclear policy program at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. Mark Fitzpatrick, director of the Non-Proliferation and Disarmament program at the International Institute for Strategic Studies. Anatoly Dyakov, director of the Center for Arms Control, Energy and Environmental Studies at the Moscow Institute of Physics and Technology. John Carlson, counselor with the Nuclear Threat Initiative. Gustav Lindstrom, director of the Euro-Atlantic Security Program and director of the Emerging Security Challenges Program at the Geneva Center for Security Policy. Sergei Oznobyshev, director of the Institute for Strategic Assessment. Tariq Rauf, principal at Global Nuclear Solutions Incorporated. Jarmo Sarajeva, deputy secretary general of the Conference on Disarmament. These experts discussed ways to determine when a state's nuclear problem was approaching the red line, meaning evidence of its intention to build nuclear weapons. The key task was to set the limits of what's called nuclear tolerance. In April 2008 in Moscow, the forum's working group discussed the Iran nuclear issue. Moshe Kantor warned that no UN Security Council resolutions would stop Iran. Robert Einhorn, senior counselor with the International Security Program at the US Center for Strategic and International Studies, emphasized, Iran has been actively developing medium-range missiles and testing rockets that would allow boosting of its satellites into orbit, which in turn means that Iran may have long-range missiles. We should be ready for such a course of events, and therefore the deployment of missile interceptors in Czechia and Poland is necessary. However, the deployment of anti-ballistic missile systems near Russia's borders could only provoke a negative response in Moscow. When the supervisory board of the Luxembourg Forum met again in December 2013 in Warsaw, the agreement concerning Iran's nuclear program had finally been reached. The signing of the agreement, said Moshe Kantor, became possible largely due to harsh trade and financial economic sanctions imposed on Iran by the European Union and the United States. Now, academic Nikolai Lavyerov said, "We must learn early on to detect attempts by different countries to create nuclear weapons under the guise of developing atomic power engineering." The idea was to establish a special body to control the process of creation of not just nuclear weapons, but also nuclear delivery vehicles. General Vladimir Dworkin, chairman of the organizing committee of the Luxembourg Forum, explained, "The IAEA has qualified specialists, but they cannot arrange instrumental monitoring of nuclear delivery vehicles, nor analyze telemetric information intercepted by radio-technical reconnaissance satellites or ship and land-based facilities. Therefore, I suggest the establishment of a special center or agency for controlling the process of creation, not just of nuclear weapons, but also of nuclear delivery vehicles. The center could work in close contact with the IAEA, but it should absorb all information, including operational information. And if operational information is supported by technical reconnaissance and telemetry data, then it would be fairly difficult to deny concrete evidence of violation of the non-proliferation regime." Vladimir Putin, head of the Russian government, addressed the 2007 Luxembourg conference. The end of the Cold War has considerably reduced the nuclear threat. But the world did not become safer. The principal dangers are international terrorism and the threat of nuclear weapons or related materials falling into the hands of terrorists. Another destabilizing factor is the increasing factor of force in world affairs. As a consequence, some states are tempted by giving preference to a nuclear choice. However, not everyone thought so. "I think," said Hans Blix confidently, "it is time to realize that today, interstate wars have become a rarity. Why? Earlier, wars were waged for borders, for territory, ideology or religion. Today, those reasons are irrelevant. The increased interdependence of states also reduces the likelihood of military clashes. Regrettably, it will soon become clear that the situation is rapidly changing for the worse." Hans Blix could not have imagined that the world would, in a sense, turn back, that force would again become an argument in politics, that war would be waged for territory, and the tune in world politics would be set by nationalists and isolationists. Moshe Kantor's idea that the best minds should unite to oppose these destructive trends turned out to be prophetic. One practical outcome from the conference was the establishment of the permanent Luxembourg Forum. Its International Advisory Council includes more than 50 leading world-renowned experts. Over the years, the Forum became an effective tool for the analysis of all aspects of nuclear danger. Proposals by the Luxembourg Forum, based on in-depth analysis, are regularly circulated to the heads of leading states, as well as the UN, IAEA, NATO, and CSTO headquarters. In Russia, important work is carried out by retired General Professor Vladimir Dworkin, who formerly headed a think tank for the strategic missile forces of Russia, and academic Alexei Arbatov, State Deputy Duma at various times and Deputy Chairman of the State Duma Committee for Defense. "It is our duty," said Moshe Kantor, "and the voice of our honorable participants is weighty, because you are the leading experts in this area. So it is our duty to tell people that the nuclear threat is a very real threat." Countries distrust each other. These apprehensions are quite understandable, and there is a long history behind them. Meanwhile, it is evident that, just as a nuclear catastrophe threatens all countries, the struggle against this danger is a common cause for all mankind, of all regrettably divided but equally vulnerable mankind. The Luxembourg Forum is one of 4 influential organizations in the area of international security, the other 3 being the famous 4: former U.S. Secretary of Defense Bill Perry, Senator Sam Nunn, the former U.S. Secretaries of State George Shultz and Henry Kissinger, the Australian-Japanese International Commission for Disarmament and Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, co-chaired by Australia's former Minister of Foreign Affairs Gareth Evans, and former Japanese Minister for Foreign Affairs Yoriko Kawaguchi. Global Zero, whose aim is the complete elimination of nuclear arsenals. When it comes to nuclear weapons reduction, strengthening the non-proliferation regime, the prevention of nuclear terrorism, or the North Korea and Iran nuclear crises, the Luxembourg Forum's recommendations are taken into account in decision-making and resonate with major international organizations, including the European Union and NATO. The Luxembourg Forum's well-thought-out recommendations were heard. In Prague, in 2010, the then President of Russia, Dmitry Medvedev, and US President Barack Obama signed the Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty, which agreed about a 1/3 reduction in strategic offensive arms. The document completely maintains a balance of interests between Russia and the United States, said Dmitry Medvedev. The main thing is that there are no winners or losers. Both sides have won, as they have strengthened their security. And with our victory, the whole world community has won. Immediately after the treaty was signed, the International Luxembourg Forum Working Group on Preventing Nuclear Catastrophe met in Vienna. The Forum President, Moshe Kantor, stressed that the treaty would allow the renewal of the nuclear disarmament process in all directions. Now the United States and Russia could reduce not just strategic, but also tactical nuclear arms, while it would be worthwhile for the UK, France and China to undertake a commitment to limit their nuclear forces to the existing levels. Everything seemed to be possible. The forum focused on major problems. Further agreements by the United States and Russia on reduction of nuclear arms, said Moshe Kantor, depend on the cooperation of the 2 countries and leading European states in the development, deployment, and joint use of anti-ballistic missile systems. The USA's ABM defense is the primary danger in the eyes of Russia's military. It took so many years to build up an arsenal of ballistic missiles with enough nuclear warheads to destroy the United States. If the Americans were really able to shoot them all down so easily, many years of strenuous effort would go down the drain. Igor Ivanov, former Minister of Foreign Affairs and Secretary of the Security Council of Russia, said, If you analyze the situation in recent years, you can see that the ABM theme was one of the most sensitive in our relations with the United States and NATO. Therefore, we should use our best efforts to defuse the problem. ABM is about trust and transparency, and changes in philosophy, overcoming the division of the world into we and they. It should be a common ABM, as we face common threats and tasks. The former Chief of Staff of Russia's strategic missile forces, Viktor Yesin, believed that as a first step, Russia and the United States could agree on information and intelligence cooperation, bring back to life the Joint Data Exchange Center project, and make it an operational center for conjunction and further integration of anti-ballistic missile system resources for early warnings about missile launches. Another step, to resume joint NATO and Russia exercises in ABM defense and thus lay the foundation for cooperation in the development and deployment of ABM defense systems. General Dvorkin emphasized such cooperation would allow Russia and the United States to depart from mutual nuclear deterrence inherited from the Cold War. Mutual nuclear deterrence is one of the factors that prevents us from becoming fully fledged partners and even allies, Dvorkin believes. In May 2011, the leaders of 8 leading countries met in Deauville, France. President of the Luxembourg Forum, Moshe Kantor, insisted that joint ABM exercises should be resumed, and information systems in Russia, the United States, and NATO members integrated in order to create an ABM defense against a third party, primarily Iran's ballistic missiles. Presidents Dmitry Medvedev and Barack Obama discussed the possibility of developing a joint ABM defense system, but without much success. After 2020, if we fail to agree, a new arms race will begin, Medvedev said then. The new arms race was to begin much sooner. In December 2010, Moscow hosted a meeting of the Supervisory Board of the Luxembourg Forum, attended by William Perry, former U.S. Secretary of Defense, Rolf Ekius, Chairman of the Board of SIPRI, academic Roald Sagdeev, Ambassador Nikolai Spassky, the Deputy Director General of Rosatom and others. Sergei Ryabkov, Deputy Russian Foreign Minister, read out President Medvedev's address. We highly appreciate the forum's activities aimed at achieving important objectives, such as the strengthening of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty regime, improvement of arms control mechanisms, and prevention of the threat of nuclear terrorism. Your proposals and recommendations find practical application in solving the problem of achieving those 2 noble goals by the world community. Igor Ivanov, former Minister of Foreign Affairs and Secretary of the Security Council of Russia, said in an interview with RIA Novosti, "Frankly speaking, when I was a minister, I did not feel much sympathy for such forums and similar people's democracy. It seemed to me that we in the Foreign Ministry were qualified specialists and could make the right decisions all by ourselves. However, over the years, I have become wiser and radically changed my point of view. Nuclear non-proliferation is no longer a matter for a narrow group of specialists, as nuclear weapons possessed by terrorists turn from an abstract threat into a real danger that affects us all. Today, the forum is essential. It prepares specific proposals for decision-makers. We are doing preliminary work that is sometimes difficult at the official level due to tough instructions or reciprocal claims. We do not have these limitations here, and we are looking for areas of common interest." Linton Brooks, former Under-Secretary of Energy for Nuclear Security, agrees. "We do not know whether our recommendations affect policy-making. Naturally, we do not expect that our reports will immediately become law. But here the wisest men from different countries, influential and reputable people have gathered. They exchange their ideas and bring them to the notice of their governments. The situation is largely changing thanks to this open communication." Stockholm hosted the International Luxembourg Forum Conference with the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, SIPRI. Moshe Kantor warned, "The example of Iran will result in nuclear arms possessed by many states, not just in the Near and Middle East, but in other regions too. Terrorists will also gain access to nuclear materials. Al-Qaeda and other radical Islamist organizations have long been after them. A considerable strengthening of the role and influence of radical Islamist parties and groups in North Africa and the Middle East should not be ruled out. A power vacuum may lead to the intensification of terrorist activities and a higher probability of nuclear terrorism. In spring 2015, Europe was flooded with huge numbers of refugees, primarily from Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan and North Africa. More than 1 million people sought refuge in the European Union. Actually, today, illegal migration is a channel through which extremism is imported into Europe, emphasized the head of the Luxembourg Forum. A string of terrorist attacks by radical Islamists followed, which provoked an unprecedented growth of the ultra-right in Europe. The theft of nuclear fuel by terrorist groups constitutes the greatest danger, believes Rolf Ekius, member of the Luxembourg Forum Supervisory Board and former chairman of the board of the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute. It is rather difficult to create a nuclear explosive device. The stealing of nuclear fuel, the use of which may be equated to radiological warfare, is much more probable, and terrorist organizations are quite capable of doing it. The users will be the first victims, but then there is a vogue for sacrifice among terrorists of the Islamic fundamentalist persuasion. Des Brown, former UK Secretary of State for Defence, stated at the Luxembourg Forum, "One can disperse radioactive materials in the air by a conventional explosion and kill a great many people. These materials are used in medicine. They are accessible." In September 2012, the Luxembourg Forum held a joint meeting with the Geneva Centre for Security Policy, GCSP. The participants came to the conclusion that the threat of a new war in the Persian Gulf in the near future is great as never before. That prediction proved correct when the attacks against oil tankers began. After a short period of constructive steps and optimistic expectations in respect of international security, the negotiation process came to a standstill. Contrary to expectations, the United States and Russia failed to reach an agreement on cooperation in the development of a European ABM system, which resulted in escalating tension and distrust. In 2012, the Russian Foreign Minister, Sergei Lavrov, addressed Luxembourg Forum experts in the Federal Republic of Germany. "We follow with interest the activities of the Luxembourg Forum, which includes many reputable political figures and experts." Addressing the conference, Igor Ivanov, a former Russian foreign minister, stressed, "The level of controllability in world politics today tends to decrease, while the imbalance of international relations increases." General Dvorkin spoke about problems concerning China. 4 of the countries of the Big Nuclear Five, the United States, Russia, the UK, and France, have disclosed their nuclear programs in full, and only China says nothing about its nuclear forces. However, experts consider that in its many kilometer-long tunnels, China may have additional nuclear warheads and even mobile launchers with nuclear missiles, the number of which it is impossible to estimate. In June 2015 in Stockholm, Mark Fitzpatrick, head of the Non-Proliferation and Nuclear Policy Program at the International Institute for Strategic Studies in London, said of the North Korean nuclear problem, "Instead of keeping his promise and joining President Putin in Moscow to commemorate the 70th anniversary of victory over Nazi Germany, the young leader of North Korea stayed at home and led his own festivities." Kim Jong-un's unexpected decision to decline Putin's invitation bewildered observers. Was he afraid of a coup d'etat in his absence, or was he offended by Moscow's refusal to sell him the S-300 air defense system? One possible reason became clear when North Korea announced its first test of a submarine-launched ballistic missile. Pyongyang revealed pictures of a smiling Kim near the submarine from which the missile had apparently been launched. The Democratic People's Republic of Korea has moved to a new level in the development of its strategic programs. Submarine-based ballistic missiles would enable North Korea to strike at US cities and push through South Korea's anti-missile defenses that are designed to protect it against ground-launched missiles. For the first time in history, Chinese specialists are more alarmed than their American counterparts, possibly because they are better informed about the North Korean situation. Nuclear tests and a missile program redoubled Pyongyang's threats to turn Seoul into a sea of fire. Nuclear status is envisaged in the DPRK constitution, but all this may provoke South Korea into developing its own nuclear program. The DPRK has never been censored for its nuclear program, so the world drew a conclusion. The North Koreans have a bomb, and that makes them untouchable. Consequently, we should have a bomb too. If an atom is split all over the world, a spontaneous chain reaction may be triggered sooner or later. Bomb owners, especially small countries in conflict with their neighbors, may decide to use it in a critical situation. In June 2014, at a round table in Geneva, Luxembourg Forum experts noted with concern that the most important nuclear non-proliferation problems had fallen by the wayside because of the marked aggravation of relations between the West and Russia due to the situation in Ukraine. In December 2014, in Prague, the Luxembourg Forum's president, Moshe Kantor, stated, "Now that relations between the West and Russia are in severe crisis due to the situation in Ukraine, efficient cooperation on opposing new challenges and threats and in countering the large-scale offensive of Islamic extremists is impossible." Journalists asked Moshe Kantor, to what extent does the conflict between Russia and the United States hinder the Luxembourg Forum? Your American and Russian experts. To no extent at all, Kantor replied. It is clear ice that hinders movement. The Luxembourg Forum is designed in such a way that retired politicians and generals find it much easier to come to an understanding than policymakers. The idea of the Luxembourg Forum is to find possible solutions within an expert framework, rather than a political or diplomatic framework. General Dvorkin noted, "I actually know all the international organizations in this sphere. None of them generates an agreed list of proposals and recommendations for the heads of leading states, the UN Security Council, or other international organizations. Experts exchange views and then leave." The Luxembourg Forum spends a lot of time having general proposals agreed by experts and circulating them to the heads of leading states. The priority goal now is this. In the context of a severe crisis in relations between the West and Russia, to develop and recommend to world leaders urgent measures for normalization of regional and strategic stability. In June 2016 in Amsterdam, they nostalgically recalled the Reykjavik meeting 30 years ago between the Soviet General Secretary, Mikhail Gorbachev, and US President Ronald Reagan that stopped the arms race. The Forum President, Moshe Kantor, emphasized, "There was the trust then that we so badly need today. The leaders of the USSR and the United States understood the catastrophic consequences of the use of nuclear weapons and the need for their radical reduction." The meeting was attended by Anatoly Adamyshin, first Deputy Foreign Minister of the USSR, and Ambassador Yuri Nazarkin, head of the Russian delegation during talks on the START I treaty. Forum participants recognized the historic merits of Gorbachev. He wanted to put an end to the Cold War, and it was over. Today we may talk of a deficit of leaders willing to solve major problems based on cooperation. The fear of weapons of mass destruction has gone. The world has returned to earlier times when nuclear war was considered quite possible. Politicians, the military, and journalists boldly threaten their enemies with a blow that would burn them to ashes. If we become accustomed to such discourse, it would be quite easy to press the big red button. In our common opinion, the threat of nuclear war is quite real. Igor Ivanov, an outstanding Russian diplomat and former Minister of Foreign Affairs, said at the Luxembourg Forum session, an American journalist sitting opposite US President Donald Trump in the Oval Office in the White House noticed a small red button on his desk and joked, "Is that the nuclear button?" "No, but people think it is," Trump answered, not without a certain amount of pleasure, and pressed the button to order a Coca-Cola. He said, "They are a little nervous when I press it." Russia and the United States withdraw from the negotiating process, a situation that hasn't existed for several decades. A lack of information about the other party's arms leads both to an overestimation of the forces and capabilities of the other side, and creates the urge to build up your own arsenals. That is the path to an uncontrolled arms race, and the breakdown of strategic stability. Moshe Kantor stated at the Luxembourg Forum, "We see the militarization of consciousness. Disarmament is a scornful word for the establishment. Many politicians do not understand that even a single use of nuclear arms would be a worldwide catastrophe. The term nuclear winter, that is the destruction of life even for the survivors of a nuclear exchange, has been forgotten." Academic Alexei Arbatov cited a horrifying figure. 1 billion people would die in a nuclear war between Pakistan and India. Des Brown, former UK Secretary of State for Defence. The current generation of world leaders simply does not know much about these matters, yet they guide great powers. The conviction has reappeared that nuclear weapons help save the world. They have forgotten that this is a destabilizing weapons system, and its use will close the chapter on the history of mankind. Academic Arbatov said, "Nuclear arsenals have been reduced for 25 years, and this has led to an unexpected psychological effect. It is no longer understood that a nuclear war cannot be won. Note that none of the world leaders pronounce this formula. On the contrary, they discuss modernization of nuclear weapons, which has an impact on the behavior of the military and the public mentality. The notion of a Cold War has lost its frightening meaning. We have forgotten that it could have developed into a hot war at any point. Therefore, it is very important for the Luxembourg Forum to continue its work. Someone must tell world leaders and the world community what is actually happening, and what must be done to prevent a nuclear catastrophe."